Hello, and welcome to the next chapter of the competitive biography of Emanuel Lasker. By virtue of him winning the Breslau 1889 Hauptturnier, not only did Lasker secure an invite to the next Master Tournament, but he would also begin receiving invites for tournaments across Europe, starting with the tournament held in the Netherlands only 1 month after the previous Congress finished. For those of you interested in logistics, here's a screenshot from the British Chess Magazine. Now that I have an English source for one of these, I'm more than happy to share it. I won't put you guys through having to translate the German. As always, below the camera are the other competitors, and unlike the previous tournament, all of Lasker's games were recorded and published, so we will be getting around to seeing each one of these gentlemen in due time. One unfortunate occurrence that we'll be repeating is that there are an odd number of competitors. I've seen it reported that there was one more person invited, the English master Joseph Blackburn. I haven't seen this substantiated enough for me to want to say that it's very likely, but we're going to be dealing with 9 players, and so the standings at the bottom of the screen are going to be slightly offset as per usual. We'll have to deal with it. There's nothing I can do. So, with all the fluff out of the way, let's get right into the game. Round number 1, Lasker plays off against the winner of the 1887 Hauptturnier, Johann Bauer. Now, Bauer won the Frankfurt Hauptturnier with much less drama than Lasker, winning the final group with an undefeated 4.5 out of 5 score. Very incredible stuff. This, of course, earned him an invitation to the Master Tournament held just 1 month prior, and while the cross table is a little bit hard to read, I'll tell you his 10 out of 17 score was good enough for shared 4th place overall. Not too shabby if I do say so. So I would say he's probably a really good opponent for Lasker in his first ever international tournament. He's certainly not a pushover, as some of the players in the previous tournament were, but he's perhaps within the realm of calling himself a colleague of Lasker. The two are probably pretty close, and I think this will be a good chance to give Lasker a warm-up of sorts as he jumps into the international tournament scene. So without further ado, let's get to work. Emanuel Lasker, with the white pieces, we're actually seeing one of those games, starts with f4. Yes, he's playing the Bird's opening. Now, in the first video of this series, we looked at Fromm's gambit with e5. Here, Bauer opts for the more popular and more classical variation of d5, so we're going into some sort of reverse Dutch. e3, knight f6, now b3 from Lasker, e6 and bishop to b2, bishop to e7, and now bishop to d3. As far as I've seen, this is the only game to play this move here, although the true novelty isn't for a couple of moves. The most popular move by a wide margin is, I think, unsurprisingly, knight to f3, and I have yet another game from the New York 1889 tournament to talk about. This was played quite conveniently in the game between James Mason and Constant Ferdinand Baril, the two gentlemen I previously discussed who both beat Chigorin at this tournament. Anyway, the game continued c5 by Baril, and only now bishop to d3 was played. Knight to c6, and here c3 was a move which Wilhelm Steinitz wrote was not commendable. Queen to c7, knight to a3, a6, of course you gotta take away b5, knight to c2, and e5 here. And while this game would ultimately end up drawn, black was never worse, which is definitely quite the accomplishment when you're facing such a prestigious player as James Mason. Anyway, bishop to d3 was played here by Lasker, and now Bauer responds with the move b6. The tournament book is very adamant that white will be looking to play in very short order knight to c3 to e2 to g3, and so they seek to prevent this by starting here with a6. And believe it or not, this does earn the Stockfish stamp of approval. They justify it in the line starting with knight to f3, c5, and both players castle. If white were to play knight to c3 here, then black has access to this move b5, the point being that knight to e2 simply drops a bishop to c4. So if white is looking to play this knight to c3 maneuver, they have to start with a4. And then after knight b to d7, knight to c3 here, the threat is renewed with queen to c7. c4 is going to be coming again if knight to e2. So black has, for the moment, stopped this from happening, and the game will go on from here. But b6 was played by Bauer, and after knight to c3, bishop to b7, knight to f3, knight b to d7, castles, castles, all very straightforward stuff. There are 2 other games in the database here with this position that played queen to e1 and bishop to e2 respectively. But Lasker goes for the telegraphed move of knight to e2, and so it says of move 9 that the players are playing a unique game. Here Bauer continues by playing c5. The German chess newspaper correctly recommends the alternative move of knight to c5 to simply delete this bishop here on d3. The thing is, after c5, here Lasker plays knight to g3, and he's gotten what he wanted. All of his minor pieces are now stationed on the king side and looking very ominously towards Bauer's castled king. Here Bauer continues on his plan by playing queen to c7. The move c4 no longer wins a bishop outright, but it's still a useful move to limit its activity. Lasker prevents this with knight to e5. We have knight captures e5 and bishop captures on e5. The queen slides down to c6, and now Lasker plays a move that I think is very Lasker. Queen to e2. Now what's the point of this? The move that black wants to play is d4. Of course, you've set up this battery here, why not? But now we see the point of queen to e2. For one, it defends the g2 pawn, very important dealing with checkmate, but another is that it double protects the b5 square. So white can play this move bishop to b5, and there's this nice sadistic little maneuver. If black tries to keep the battery with queen to d5, now bishop back to c4, and if queen back to c6, f5, and white's attack will come faster. To show one line, suppose black escapes from the bishop's gaze by playing king to h8. White can, at the very least, win a pawn by trading here on e6, and then twice here on d4, e4, cd4, bishop captures on d4. And while black certainly has some compensation for the pawn, you're going to find it very difficult to find compensation for potentially a second pawn, as this e6 pawn is very likely to fall in the future. So I would say white would have the better game here. So with that in mind, d4 prevented. So Bauer recognizes the threat of bishop to b5 and prevents it with a6. And believe it or not, a6 is a horrible blunder that gives Bauer in a lot of trouble right away. Now what I want you to do, pause the video, see if you can find the move that Lasker played that really got the fireworks started right away. All right, 3, 2, 1. Knight to h5. Now this is the real reason why queen to e2 is such a Lasker move, because of its psychological nature. Lasker goaded Bauer into focusing on his queen side, when in reality this move is meant to fully allow for this upcoming king side attack. Now what do I mean by that? Well, Bauer started by playing knight captures on h5. This exacerbates the problem, but it's hard to find anything. The engine's top pick is to play rook f to c8. The problem is that after knight captures on f6 check, bishop captures on f6, now here comes bishop captures on h7 with check. If you take it, queen to h5 comes with check, and the king side just has no defenders. And if the king goes over to f8, then d4 comes, shutting down black's attempt at d4, leaving white with both the pawn and the compensation, as they say. So knight captures on h5 makes a lot of sense, but bishop captures on h7 once again, and now we see what really happens. King captures on h7, and now queen captures on h5 with check, of course. King to g8, and now the move that made this game as famous as it is, bishop captures on g7. If any of you have not heard of Lasker's double bishop sacrifice game, this is indeed what we're looking at. Now the sacrifice does have to be accepted. f5 is given as a move. It's one way to stop queen to h8 checkmate, as now f7 is opened up. The tournament book analyzes this position starting with rook to f3, which is certainly fine for white, but fastest is to play the move bishop to e5. And after rook to f6, which is necessary to stop queen to g6 with check, only now rook to f3 is really strong. And now let's say, for example, king to f8, rook to g3. Black can really only delay mate by giving up a bunch of material. Bishop to g5, rook captures on g5, and after king to e7, queen h7 check, king to d8, rook to g8 check, queen to e8 is forced, and everything is capped off with a nice little move, queen to c7, not even taking any more material, just giving mate on the spot. Beautiful stuff. So all that to say, you have to accept the second bishop. So king captures on g7, we have queen to g4 with check, king to h7, and now rook to f3 from Lasker. Bauer has exactly one way to prevent immediate checkmate, and it's not pretty. e5. The point being that after rook to h3 with check, he can block with queen to h6. So rook captures on h6 with check, king captures on h6, and if this wasn't enough, Lasker even gets to play queen to d7, forking the bishops and adding insult to injury. Bishop to f6, and queen captures on b7. So now that the fireworks are over, let's take a quick second to count the material. White has a queen in exchange for a rook and a bishop, which generally favors the queen, but on top of that, he also has two extra pawns. It's completely winning. Now, because the rest of this game is not going to be super educational, one thing I would like to do is to go back and take a look at this position here. I said that queen to e2 was meant to fully support the kingside attack, and I think that deserves a little bit more elaboration. The engine here, believe it or not, likes to play knight to h5 right away instead of queen to e2. The problem with that is that it does allow d4. Now in this position, white only keeps any sort of advantage by playing the move rook to f2, which leads to a wildly different game than what we see. The analogous position is what we get in the game has a glaring flaw, as if queen to e2 now, then we see the same idea, knight h5, bishop h7, king h7, queen h5, king to g8, and now bishop to g7 obviously doesn't work because of queen captures on g2 with checkmate. Very slight difference. So that is why queen to e2 right away, preventing this move of d4, was so crucial to the defense and ultimately to the attack. So that leads us back to this position. We're on move 23, Lasker is up a whole bunch of material, and Bauer doesn't resign. He continues playing king to g7. So again, at this point, there isn't really much analysis for us to do. Lasker is completely winning, but there's still a couple of points that you'll want to see, I believe. Rook to f1. Okay, let's continue. The king is still exposed. Why not keep attacking it? We have rook a to b8, queen to d7 escapes it, and now rook f to d8. So queen to g4 with check. We have king to f8, and now f captures on e5. This wins a little bit more material for white, as if bishop captures on e5, queen to e6 is kind of unfortunate. This pawn is pinned, and so we get this really unfortunate fork. So bishop back to g7, and now e6. How do you defend the f7 pawn? Rook to b7, but now queen to g6. And again, how do you defend the f7 pawn? The other rook can't help because the d7 square is covered, so Bauer tries the move f6, which in his defense is the best move in this position, but now Lasker gets to throw in yet another tactical beauty. Rook captures on f6 with check. His point being, after bishop captures on f6, queen captures on f6 with check. King to e8 is forced, and now queen to h8 with check. King to e7, queen to g7 with check. King captures e6, and now queen captures on b7. So thanks to Bauer not resigning, we get another lovely tactic in this game. He doesn't resign here either, for whatever reason. Rook to d6, I mean, sure, protect the b6 pawn, but queen captures on a6. Here we have d4 from Bauer, e captures d4, c captures d4, and after h4 from Lasker, he even plays the move d3. The only thing I could possibly think of is that Bauer is hoping to sacrifice literally everything and get some sort of stalemate. I don't know exactly how this would come about, but I do know that Lasker ends it very amusingly with queen captures on d3. Now, of course, here, if rook takes the queen, the pawn endgame is obviously winning. If the rook doesn't move, then Lasker will probably take it and get that same endgame. And the only other option is to play rook to c6, where I can very easily imagine Lasker playing queen to g6 and picking up the rook this way. So after 38, queen captures d3, it was here that Johann Bauer resigned the game, and the first round of the Amsterdam 1889 tournament goes to Emanuel Lasker. So yeah, like I said at the end of the previous tournament, we are going to be having much more interesting players, and by extension, much more interesting games, and I don't believe that it gets much more interesting than this when we're looking at Lasker's games from this time period. So I hope you enjoyed. I can't promise that we'll have games of quite this level of excitement moving forward, but we'll do what we can. We'll see what we have. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one.